Introduction. You were taught to be agreeable. Say yes. Don't rock the boat. Smile politely. Make everyone else comfortable, even if it costs you your peace. But here's the truth. You weren't put on this earth to be convenient. You weren't born to live someone else's schedule, chase someone else's dreams, or shrink your fire just to keep other people warm. You're here for something deeper, and it begins with a word that's small but mighty. A single syllable that will reclaim your time, protect your energy, and draw a bold line between your purpose and their expectations. No. The word no is not rejection. It's not resistance. It's protection. It's a compass pointing back to your true north. Every time you say no to something that doesn't serve you, you say yes to something far greater. Your clarity, your boundaries, your vision, your peace. Most people are running on empty because they're too afraid to disappoint others. But here's a secret no one told you growing up. Every yes you say to others is a no you whisper to yourself. In this audiobook, we're not here to shout. We're not here to preach. We're here to unlearn the lies, to dismantle the guilt, to rediscover your personal power, one bold no at a time. This isn't about arrogance, it's about alignment. This isn't about isolation, it's about integrity. And above all, this is about reclaiming your life, not later. Now, by the time we reach the end, no won't be something you fear. It'll be your greatest form of self-respect. Ready? Let's begin. Chapter 1. The first lie. Saying no means you're selfish. You were barely old enough to tie your shoes when they started training you. Be nice. Share your toys. Don't say no. It's rude. So you learned. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You nodded when your gut twisted in warning. You said yes, 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 until yes became your default setting. You became agreeable, and in that process something precious was taken from you. Not all at once, but quietly, piece by piece. Your sovereignty. Here's what no one tells you. When you're taught that your value lies in being liked, you begin to betray yourself just to keep the peace. Saying no isn't selfish. It's a return to center. It's a refusal to hand over your life, your hours, your sanity to someone else's agenda. Selfishness is when you demand the world orbit around you. Saying no is when you choose not to orbit around someone else. There's a difference, a vital one. And yet, the word no is so misunderstood. We've buried it beneath shame, labeled it unkind, wrapped it in guilt until even thinking it feels like wrongdoing. But here's the kicker. The people who fear your no are often the ones who benefited most from your silence. That's why it stings. That's why they resist. Because every time you say no, you force them to face something they'd rather avoid, that they don't own your time, your love, your presence. You do. They'll call you cold, difficult, hard to work with, self-centered, and they'll be right. If by self-centered they mean you finally decided to center your life around something real, yourself. Let's be clear, saying no doesn't make you a bad friend, a bad employee, or a bad partner. It makes you an honest one. No is not rejection, it's a boundary. And the first step in reclaiming your life is this. Stop apologizing for protecting your energy. You don't owe everyone access. Not everyone gets a backstage pass. Not everyone should. There's no trophy for overextension. No medal for burnout. No prize at the end of your life for being the most exhausted. Saying no isn't a betrayal of others. It's a commitment to yourself. So let's rewrite the script. Not with permission, not with guilt, not with fear, but with conviction. This chapter isn't about turning your back on the world. It's about turning back to face yourself. You've bent over backward long enough. Straighten your spine. Raise your head. Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. No is not selfish. It's sacred. Here's the part they never explain. People will only respect your boundaries after you enforce them, not before. Respect isn't given to those who always say yes. It's given to those who mean it when they say no. But that means some people will leave. Let them. That means some people will be angry. Let them. Anger isn't the worst thing someone can feel toward you. Disrespect is. And the more you dilute yourself just to be digestible, the more you teach others that your needs are optional. But your peace, that's not optional. Your sleep, your creativity, your ability to sit in a room and feel at home inside your own skin, that's not a luxury. That's your foundation. There's this silent epidemic happening. People walking around with smiles stretched across tired faces, nodding through obligations they never wanted, stuck in lives they never chose. They're praised for being reliable, helpful, team players, but inside they're vanishing. The spark is gone. The edge has dulled. The version of them that once dreamed fearlessly has packed up and left. And all because no one ever told them. Saying no isn't cruel. It's clarity. Look, the world doesn't need another doormat. It doesn't need another person saying yes when their soul is screaming. What the world needs is someone brave enough to choose what matters. Someone who can hear the noise and not flinch. Who can say, "That's not for me," and walk away without guilt. The people who say no aren't heartless. They just know what's worth their heart. Let's talk about the cost of yes. Every yes you give out of guilt creates a slow erosion inside. You feel it when you agree to stay late at work again, because you didn't want to seem ungrateful. You feel it when you say yes to a relationship, a call, an event, and halfway through you're already fantasizing about being alone again. That's not life. That's survival. Your yes should come from enthusiasm, not obligation, from purpose, not pressure. And if that means fewer people understand you, so be it. Let them misunderstand. Let them form opinions. Let them talk. Because while they're busy making noise, you'll be busy making peace. The people who matter, the real ones, they won't just tolerate your no, they'll respect it. They'll recognize it for what it is, a declaration that you have limits, that you value your time, and that you know your worth. And here's the twist. When you start saying no to the wrong things, the right things begin to show up. Doors you didn't know existed begin to open. People who match your energy, who honor your space, who mirror your clarity, they begin to arrive, all because you made room. All because you finally said no. Here's a truth that might rattle the cage a bit. People don't get upset when you say no because they're hurt. They get upset because your no disrupts the comfort of their control. And if someone only values your presence when you're easy, when you're compliant, when you say yes to everything they want, what they love isn't you, it's your obedience. You are not here to be anyone's easy. You are not a machine, not a lifeline, not a backup plan. You are a full thinking, breathing human being with needs of your own, and honoring those needs, especially when it's inconvenient to others, is not a betrayal. It's the most honest form of living. The lie that no is selfish was never about morality. It was always about power. Because a person who knows how to say no can't be manipulated. They can't be guilt-tripped. They can't be used as a ladder for someone else's climb. So ask yourself, who taught you to feel bad for protecting yourself? Whose voice lives rent-free in your head? When you think about choosing rest over responsibility, solitude over small talk, honesty over harmony, was it a parent, a teacher, a partner, a culture, and more importantly, how much longer will you let that voice dictate your decisions? Here's the radical shift. You don't need to explain your no. You don't need to over-justify it. You don't need a 10-point reason. You don't need to wrap it in sugar to soften the blow. No is a full sentence. It's not rude. It's not dramatic. It's direct. It's efficient. It's powerful. The more you try to dilute your no, the more room you leave for others to question it, to poke holes, to push back. Clarity silences confusion, and if someone truly cares for you, they will honor your clarity, even if it's inconvenient to them. It's not your job to carry everyone. It's not your job to be accessible all the time. You don't exist to manage other people's discomfort. You're allowed to disappoint others if it means being loyal to yourself. That's not selfish. That's strength. When you say yes to things that drain you, you are slowly trading your identity for acceptance. Every time you override your own gut for someone else's convenience, you chip away at something essential, your trust in yourself. That's the part no one sees. Outwardly, you seem cooperative. Such a good person, always there, always reliable. But inside, there's a war. You begin to second-guess what you want. You feel resentment bubbling under the surface, but you silence it. You tell yourself to be grateful, to be kind, to not make waves. Meanwhile, you're drowning in obligations, and they don't even notice. Because the world rarely asks if you're okay when you're performing well. But what if you stopped performing? What if you paused and asked yourself, who am I when I'm not trying to keep everyone else comfortable? That question is terrifying, because for a long time, your value was tethered to your usefulness. If you weren't helpful, if you weren't pleasing, if you weren't saying yes, what were you? Here's the truth. Most people won't say out loud. You can be a good person and still say no. You can be compassionate and still set boundaries. You can be generous with your time without being available to everyone, all the time. There is no morality in martyrdom. Your exhaustion doesn't make you noble, and the more you glorify self-sacrifice, the more you train others to expect it from you, to rely on it, to demand it. So it's not just about learning to say no, it's about learning to say it without guilt. That's the next layer. Guilt is the ghost that shows up when you start choosing yourself. It whispers that you're being mean, that you're disappointing people, that you're falling short of who you should be. But guilt is not a moral compass, it's a habit, a deeply embedded reflex from a lifetime of conditioning. The way out. You feel the guilt, and you don't obey it. You stand your ground. You breathe through the discomfort. You remind yourself, just because it feels wrong, doesn't mean it is wrong. Growth often feels like rebellion at first, because saying no is not just a word, it's a revolution inside you. A moment of choosing presence over performance, truth over politeness, integrity over approval. And that's what real empowerment looks like. It's not loud. It's not angry. It's not flashy. It's quiet. It's steady. It's a calm, unwavering voice inside you that finally says, enough. There comes a moment, quiet, unremarkable, almost ordinary, where you stand at the edge of your own habit. Someone asks something of you. You know the answer is no. You feel it in your stomach, in the tension behind your eyes, in the way your chest tightens, but your mouth opens. The word starts to form, yes, and this time, you catch it. This time, you pause. This time, you ask yourself, if I say yes, who pays the price? Because every yes has a cost. Sometimes it costs your evening. Sometimes your peace, sometimes your dreams. And sometimes, if you let it go too long, it costs your entire sense of self. You're not just saying yes to a task. You're saying yes to a pattern, to an identity you didn't choose, but accepted, to a role you've outgrown. So instead you try something different. You say it, maybe softly at first, maybe with a tremor in your voice, and everything in your body reacts, like you've done something wrong. But then something else happens. You feel lighter, not immediately, not dramatically, but subtly, like you've just dropped a weight you didn't realize you were carrying. That's the moment you begin to rebuild. Because saying no isn't about walls, it's about clarity. It's about knowing what you stand for, so you don't fall for everything. It's about recognizing that your time is a currency, and you no longer hand it out like spare change to anyone who asks. It's about refusing to betray yourself, just to keep a conversation comfortable, a dynamic familiar, a relationship intact. And most of all, it's about becoming someone you can trust. That's the real power of no. It's not rejection. It's not confrontation. It's not a fight. It's a return to what matters, to what's real, to yourself. So if you take nothing else from this chapter, take this. You do not owe anyone access to your time, energy, or presence just because they ask for it. You are allowed to protect your space. You are allowed to not explain. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to say no, not because you're selfish, not because you're cold, but because you finally remembered. You're worth choosing to, worth choosing to, worth choosing. Chapter 2. The pressure to please. Let's call it what it is. People-pleasing is a survival strategy. You didn't wake up one day and decide to become the go-to person, the yes person, the fixer, the one who never says no. It happened slowly, like erosion. You realized early on that being agreeable got you approval, that staying quiet kept the peace, that saying yes made you easier to love. And so you did. You made yourself small so others could feel big. You softened your tone, swallowed your opinions, adjusted your needs. You learned that being liked was safer than being real. But here's the twist. That version of you, so polite, so helpful, so accommodating, wasn't you. It was the mask you wore to survive. People-pleasing is a skill, a talent even, but it comes at a cost. You become the expert in anticipating others' emotions while losing fluency in your own. You forget what you want. You silence your preferences. You hesitate, even in private, to claim space. Because somewhere deep down, you still believe, if I'm not useful, I'm not valuable. If I say no, they'll leave. If I speak up, I'll be too much. Let's be clear, this isn't about blame. It's about recognition. Recognizing the pressure to please is the first step in breaking the chain. Because the world is full of people who will gladly take your yes and give nothing in return. Not out of malice, but because you taught them it was free. You trained them. With every yes you didn't mean. With every boundary you let slide. With every time you made yourself available, even when you were running on fumes. Now it's time to retrain them. And that starts with something radical. Start pleasing yourself first. Ask yourself, what do I need right now? What would bring me peace? What is my truth in this moment? These are not selfish questions, they're necessary ones. Because a person who always puts others first isn't a saint, they're a ticking time bomb. Eventually resentment creeps in, and when it does, it poisons every yes you give. Authentic relationships don't need your self-abandonment to survive. They need your truth. Saying no doesn't mean you're pushing others away. It means you're finally inviting yourself in. So if the pressure to please has been your compass, it's time to recalibrate. Point it inward. Because no one else can give you the permission you've been waiting for. Only you can do that. And it starts, as always, with one word: no. You don't owe anyone the version of you that makes them comfortable. Read that again. The moment you start living for applause, you become a prisoner of other people's expectations. And the more you perform, the more the real you disappears behind the curtain. People-pleasing is theater. You smile on cue. You adjust your tone. You anticipate needs, read the room, shape-shift to fit. But when the curtain falls, when the performance ends, you're left wondering, who am I when no one is watching? That's the hardest part. Because when you've been performing your whole life, authenticity doesn't feel natural, it feels dangerous. It's easier to play the role, easier to say yes, easier to blend in. Until one day, something cracks. You wake up exhausted, burned out, angry, for reasons you can't fully name. You start to notice things. The way you resent your calendar, even though you filled it yourself. The way you flinch at text messages, because every ding feels like a demand. The way your smile strains at the edges, brittle from overuse. And beneath it all, a quiet voice whispers, "This isn't who I am." That voice is your turning point. It's not weakness, it's awareness. It's the part of you that's still alive, beneath the armor, still hungry for truth. The way out isn't easy. It requires disappointing people, letting go of roles, unlearning your reflex to rescue. But here's the surprising thing. The more you say no, the more you begin to trust yourself again. Your decisions start coming from alignment, not fear. Your relationships shift. Some fall away, others deepen. You begin to feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Peace, not the peace that comes from pleasing everyone, but the peace that comes from no longer betraying yourself. This peace doesn't need validation. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't require everyone to understand. It just needs you. Present, honest, whole, and maybe finally free. People-pleasing is sneaky. It doesn't always look like a big sacrifice. Sometimes it looks like staying late after work because you don't want your boss to think you're lazy. Sometimes it's laughing at a joke that lands wrong because you don't want to make things awkward. Sometimes it's a forced smile, a silent nod, a hesitant yes. Little moments, quiet betrayals, each one tiny on its own, but over time they stack up. And then one day, you don't recognize your own reflection. You've become a collage of other people's preferences, a blend of what's polite, expected, and acceptable. And the real you, the bold, wild, messy, honest you, has been buried beneath layers of obligation. Here's the thing nobody tells you. People-pleasing isn't kindness. It's fear wearing a friendly face. It's the fear of being disliked. The fear of conflict. The fear that if you say no, the world will collapse, or worse, people will stop loving you. But let's talk about love for a second. If someone's love for you is conditional on you always saying yes, that's not love. That's dependency. That's control. That's comfort disguised as connection. Real love makes room for boundaries. Real love says, "I see your no and I still stay." And the moment you begin testing those boundaries, you start seeing who's really in your corner. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it's uncomfortable. But it's also liberating. You begin to discover what it means to live with integrity, to say what you mean and mean what you say, to speak up even when your voice trembles, to say no even when your hands shake, to choose truth over harmony, knowing that the right people will respect you more for it. You don't have to explain yourself into exhaustion. You don't have to bend until you break. You get to take up space. You get to change your mind. You get to walk away from anything that costs you your peace. This is the revolution. You stop begging for permission and start giving it to yourself. Because you're not here to be digestible. You're here to be real. There's a lie you've probably swallowed whole, maybe without even realizing it. If I'm not needed, I'm not valuable. It creeps in quietly, maybe from a childhood where affection was earned through good behavior, maybe from a job where your worth was measured in output, maybe from a relationship where you were loved only when you were useful, so you became someone who could always be counted on, the one who shows up, the one who answers every call, the one who carries the weight that no one else wants to hold, and for a while it works. People praise you, they lean on you. You feel important, indispensable, even. But slowly the line blurs. You stop knowing where you end, and they begin. You forget what your own needs even are. You've trained the world to see you as a resource, and now no one asks how you're doing. They assume you're fine. You always are, even when you're not. But here's the truth, no one told you. Being needed isn't the same as being loved. People can need you without seeing you. They can depend on you without caring for you. They can praise your selflessness while quietly benefiting from your silence. That kind of validation is a drug, and the crash always comes. Because eventually the cost becomes too high. You're tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but soul tired. Tired of shrinking. Tired of giving. Tired of being the strong one. And you realize, this isn't generosity. This is self-erasure. True generosity flows from fullness, not depletion. You don't have to earn your worth through exhaustion. You don't have to prove your goodness by abandoning yourself. You are allowed to exist, even when you're not useful. So what happens when you stop chasing worth through performance? At first, there's panic. Who am I if I'm not the helper, the healer, the reliable one? But soon, if you stay still long enough, something else rises, your own voice. Quiet at first, a whisper, but it's yours. Raw, unfiltered, true, and it says, I deserve rest. I deserve peace. I deserve to belong to myself before I belong to anyone else. That's not selfish. That's reclamation. You were never meant to be everything for everyone. You were meant to be yourself, fully, unapologetically, and without permission. The pressure to please has a cost, and the invoice always comes due. It shows up in your stress levels, your sleepless nights, your resentment toward people who have no idea they're crossing a line you never voiced. Because how could they know? You smiled, you said yes, you made it look easy, but inside you were screaming. That's the paradox of people-pleasing. You sacrifice yourself to make others comfortable, and they never even know you're bleeding. So what happens when you stop? When you say no, when you choose yourself, when you dare to be honest, even if it shakes the ground a little. At first it's awkward. You over-explain. You feel guilty. You second-guess your right to say no. But each time you hold the line, something inside you strengthens. The shaking becomes stillness. The guilt becomes clarity. The silence inside you starts to echo with power. And the people who truly see you, they don't leave. They don't guilt you. They adjust. They rise to meet the new standard you've set, not just for them but for yourself. Here's what no one teaches you growing up. Your boundaries are a mirror. They reflect what you believe you're worth. When you set weak boundaries, people assume you don't value yourself. When you set strong boundaries, you teach the world how to treat you. It's not about control. It's not about punishment. It's about protection. You're protecting your time, your energy, your mental clarity, your peace. Because without peace, nothing else matters. So from here on out, when you feel the old urge rise, the need to explain, to soften, to make it easier for everyone but yourself, pause and ask, what would I do if I truly believed I was enough, even when I say no? Let that question guide you, because people-pleasing will always ask for more.
But self-respect draws a line, and then it stands behind it, firm, quiet, unshaken. That's where we go next.
Chapter 3. When you start saying no. The first time you say no, it feels like an earthquake. You expect the ground to split open. You brace yourself for backlash, for people to leave, get angry, call you names, question your character. Sometimes that happens. And when it does, it confirms the fear you've carried for years. If I stop pleasing them, I'll lose them. But here's the truth you discover in that rubble. If your yes was the glue holding something together, that thing was already broken. People often say they love you, but what they really love is the version of you that serves their comfort. When that version changes, their love gets tested, so they push back. They call you distant, selfish, difficult, cold. But what they're really saying is, I miss the version of you that didn't challenge me. That's not your responsibility. Your job is not to carry other people's disappointment. Your job is to honor your truth, even when it disappoints others. Because here's what else happens when you start saying no. You stop attracting the takers. You stop drawing in relationships that thrive on imbalance. You stop performing your way into circles where you don't belong, and you start making space for respect, reciprocity, real connection. But don't get it twisted. This transition isn't seamless. There's grief in letting go of old roles, grief in outgrowing relationships you once depended on, grief in realizing that the version of you they loved wasn't the full you, and yet that grief is sacred. It means you're alive. It means you're evolving. Saying no is the beginning of alignment, but alignment demands a purge. The false must fall away before the real can arrive. You might lose some people, but you'll never lose yourself again. And that trade, it's always worth it. There's a certain silence that follows your first few no's. It's not always the dramatic confrontation you braced for. Sometimes it's just a pause, a shift, a subtle tension in the air. Like people aren't quite sure what to do with this new version of you. They look at you differently. They question your tone. They start sentences with, "You've changed," and they're right. You have. Because change is what happens when you stop pretending. It's what happens when you stop apologizing for having a spine. But here's the part that's hard to swallow. Not everyone will like your boundaries, especially the ones who benefited from your lack of them. Some will try to guilt you. Some will try to test you. Some will vanish altogether. And every part of your nervous system will scream to go back, to smooth things over, to soften, to make it easier. That's the old conditioning flaring up, the reflex to trade truth for acceptance, to say yes, even when it costs you peace. Don't fall for it. Let the discomfort rise. Let the silence stretch. Let people adjust, or not. Your no doesn't require agreement. It doesn't need approval. It stands on its own, because this isn't about being liked anymore. It's about being real, and realness comes with friction. People might call you cold, but they never called you when they needed to check if you were okay. They only called when they needed something. So now the phone doesn't ring as much. The invitations slow down. The circle shrinks. And in that space, something sacred begins to grow. Your self-trust. You begin to hear yourself more clearly. To know what yes feels like when it's real. To feel your no without guilt. You stop reacting. You start choosing. And suddenly, life feels lighter. Not because it's easier, but because you're no longer dragging a version of yourself you outgrew. The weight was never the world. It was your unwillingness to disappoint it. Now you're learning to carry something better, your truth. There's a strange kind of freedom that follows the word no, not right away. At first it's a tremor, a whisper, a question echoing inside. Did I just mess everything up? But over time the noise fades. The fear that saying no will make you unlovable begins to shrink. The guilt starts to loosen its grip, and in its place, something new arrives. Space, not just on your calendar, but in your mind, in your body, in the way you sit at your desk, walk through your home, talk to yourself when no one's around. There's more room for breath, for thought, for truth. And in that space you start to remember things you forgot in your constant rush to please. You remember what joy feels like. Not the performative kind, the real stuff. The quiet, steady joy of choosing yourself and not needing to explain why. You remember what rest feels like, guilt-free. What clarity feels like, when you no longer say yes just to be polite. What love feels like, when it's not earned through overextension. Because when you stop saying yes out of fear, you start to feel something deeper than comfort. Alignment. You begin to recognize the difference between peace and people-pleasing. Peace doesn't come from being liked. It comes from being whole. And saying no becomes more than a boundary. It becomes a compass. You stop chasing closure from people who never gave you respect. You stop seeking validation in rooms that never saw you. You stop offering discounts on your energy just to keep things okay. You realize that okay was never enough. You weren't born to survive other people's expectations. You were born to live your life, on your terms, in your voice. Saying no clears the noise. And in that silence you hear it for the first time. Yourself, clear, uncompromising, free. It happens slowly at first. You say no once, then again. Each time the world wobbles just a little bit less, you start to see it. Boundaries don't burn bridges. They reveal who was only crossing them to take. Suddenly, you're no longer over-explaining. You're no longer answering texts out of obligation. You're no longer showing up to things that drain you just because you felt you should. And guess what? The world keeps turning. People adjust. The ones who matter recalibrate. The ones who don't, they fade. And you start to realize saying no doesn't make you difficult. It makes you clear. It's not about being unkind. It's about being honest. And when you start leading with honesty, something powerful begins to shift. You attract people who value your time, who don't take it personally when you can't show up, who respect your space because they respect you. That's the reward no one talks about. Not just peace, not just clarity, but connection. Real connection. Relationships rooted in mutual understanding, not performance. Conversations that don't require masks. Friendships that don't feel like unpaid jobs. Because when you're honest about your limits, you invite others to be honest about theirs. You create a dynamic that doesn't just tolerate boundaries, it celebrates them. This is how safety is built, not through sacrifice but through mutual respect. And inside that space you start to thrive. You take deeper breaths. You sleep better. You trust your instincts. You listen to your body instead of overriding it. You stop living to be understood by everyone else and start understanding yourself. That's the miracle of no, not the word itself, but the life it creates when you finally decide to use it. A life where your needs aren't negotiable, where your presence is earned, where your peace is non-refundable. A life that fits you, not the other way around. You will lose things when you start saying no. That's the truth most people don't want to hear. You'll lose roles you never wanted.
You'll lose approval you never needed. You'll lose people who only knew how to love you when you were bending. But what you gain, that's the story worth telling. You gain time. You gain rest. You gain space to think, to breathe, to become. You gain the mirror, finally clear, reflecting back who you are, not who you had to be to survive. Because when you start saying no, you stop shrinking. You stop apologizing for your boundaries. You stop editing yourself just to keep others comfortable. You become rooted, and rooted people, they don't chase, they don't scramble, they don't prove. They know what's theirs. They know when to walk away. They know that peace is not found in being everything to everyone. It's found in being true to yourself. This is the turning point, where you stop explaining your value and start living it. Where you stop managing other people's feelings and start managing your energy. Where you stop needing to be liked and start being respected, first and foremost by yourself. Because self-respect isn't built on how many people praise you. It's built in the quiet moments when you choose your truth, even when no one claps. You walk out of the performance. You hang up the costume. You reclaim your voice, and you understand deep in your bones that saying no doesn't close doors. It opens the right ones. The ones that align. The ones that honor. The ones that don't ask you to shrink. You weren't born to be small. You weren't made to be invisible. You weren't created to be convenient. You were born to be whole. And that begins with this one powerful life-altering word. No word. No word.
Chapter 4. Boundaries are not walls. Let's start by clearing something up. Boundaries are not a rejection of others. They are a recognition of yourself. Some people hear the word and flinch. They picture cold detachment, doors slammed shut, bridges burned. But that's not what boundaries are. Boundaries aren't a fortress. They're a filter. They separate what nourishes you from what drains you. They clarify where your responsibility ends and someone else's begins. They define the sacred territory of your time, energy, and attention. You're not saying, "I don't care about you." You're saying, "I care about me enough to know what I can't carry." And the truth is, healthy boundaries create deeper connection, not weaker ones, because real intimacy can't exist without truth. And truth can't breathe in a space where your needs are constantly compromised. Without boundaries, relationships become contracts you never agreed to. They're built on assumptions, guilt, obligation. You say yes when you mean no. You hold resentment like a secret. You perform kindness instead of living it. That's not love. That's survival. Boundaries say, "Here's who I am. Here's what I need. Here's what I can offer." Not as a threat, not as an ultimatum, as clarity. And clarity is a gift, to you and to everyone around you. It removes the guesswork. It builds trust. It shows others how to love you authentically, not performatively. Because when people know where your lines are, they can meet you where you actually are, not where they assume, hope, or expect you to be. That's when connection becomes real, rooted, honest, balanced. Boundaries aren't the end of love. They're the beginning of real love. The kind that doesn't cost your identity. The kind that honors your wholeness. The kind that says, "I see you, and I respect you enough not to cross what you've claimed as sacred." Here's a truth most people never learn. When you set boundaries, you're not controlling other people. You're simply taking responsibility for yourself. You're saying, "This is what I need to stay healthy. This is what I need to be present. This is what I need to remain whole." And that's powerful, because most of us were never taught to speak that clearly. We were taught to endure, to adjust, to hold it all together. But endurance without limits becomes resentment. Adjustment without choice becomes self-erasure. Boundaries are where you stop pretending you're okay when you're not. They're where you stop smiling when your heart is heavy. They're where you choose real over easy. And it can feel scary, because the first time you say, "I won't accept that," or "that doesn't work for me," or "I need time to myself," you feel exposed, like you just stepped outside without armor. But what you're really doing is stepping into truth. You're giving yourself permission to exist as a full person, not just a function in someone else's story. And that act alone reshapes every space you walk into. You stop shrinking to keep the peace. You stop softening your needs so others don't feel discomfort. You stop over-explaining your decisions just to avoid judgment. You say what you mean, and you mean what you say. And the people who can meet you there, they stay, they grow with you, they rise to meet the version of you that no longer performs. But the ones who were only there for the access, the convenience, the compliance, the endless yes, they begin to fade. Let them, because your job isn't to convince anyone to respect your boundaries. Your job is to hold them so firmly that you never again have to explain why they matter. They matter because you matter. And when you finally believe that, everything changes. Every time you say yes to something you don't want to do, you're saying no to something else. To your rest, to your passion, to your peace. Boundaries are how you reclaim your priorities. They draw a map of your values, not what you say you value, but what your actions prove. When you say no to the dinner you don't want to attend, you're saying yes to your evening, your solitude, your quiet joy. When you say no to a call that drains you, you're saying yes to preserving your clarity. When you say no to one more task on an already heavy day, you're saying yes to your humanity. Because you're not a machine. You were not built to operate without limits. You were not designed to be available at all times. You were not created to say yes without question. Boundaries remind you that you're allowed to have needs, to have limits, to take up space and not apologize for it. And in a world that glorifies overachievement and overextension, this act is radical. We've been conditioned to believe that saying yes means we're strong, but sometimes strength looks like rest. Sometimes it looks like canceling plans. Sometimes it looks like logging off, turning down the volume, disappearing from the noise, and choosing yourself. That's not selfish, that's sustainable. Because burnout doesn't just happen from doing too much. It happens from doing too much of what isn't aligned. Boundaries cut through the noise. They sharpen your focus. They guard your energy like it's sacred, because it is. And over time, as you practice, it gets easier. You begin to feel the moment when your yes starts turning into a maybe. You begin to hear the hesitation in your voice. You begin to trust that discomfort isn't a red flag, it's a message, a cue, a signal to check in. And you do, because now your life is no longer dictated by pressure, it's shaped by choice. That's the magic of boundaries. They don't just keep the wrong things out. They make room for the right things to come in. There's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing your limits. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to defend every decision. You don't need to over-explain or apologize for protecting your peace. That's what boundaries give you, the freedom to stand in your truth, without asking for permission. You begin to realize you were never obligated to carry so much. Not every emergency needs your attention. Not every message requires an immediate reply. Not every opportunity is meant for you, even if it looks good on paper. Because when you stop living reactively, you start living intentionally.
Boundaries carve out space for what actually matters, for the work that lights you up, for the people who respect your time, for the moments that fill you instead of depleting you. This isn't about isolation, it's about curation. You become selective, not from arrogance but from awareness, because now you know your energy is finite, and you refuse to waste it on what drains, distracts, or diminishes you. So you say no more often, you cancel when you need to, you pass on things that used to feel like obligations, and you stop feeling guilty about it. At first it feels strange. You're used to stretching, used to tolerating, used to over-accommodating. But something shifts when you start honoring your edge. You begin to trust yourself more deeply. You start listening to the quiet voice inside that always knew what you needed. You start living from your center instead of your anxiety. And from that place, life looks different. Conversations get clearer. Work becomes more focused. Relationships deepen, not because you're doing more, but because you're showing up fully. You're no longer fractured, scattered, exhausted. You're present. And presence is where your power lives. That's what boundaries make possible. Not just rest, but realness. Not just protection, but presence. They bring you home to yourself. Most people are never taught how to set a boundary. We're taught to be polite, to avoid conflict, to keep things smooth and agreeable. But here's the cost of that politeness. You spend years being everything to everyone else and nothing to yourself. Boundaries are how you come back. Back to your voice. Back to your body. Back to the version of you that isn't spread so thin she disappears in the lives of others. You start to say things you've never said before. I'm not available for that. That doesn't work for me. I'm not able to take that on. At first these words feel strange, like shoes that don't quite fit yet. But the more you wear them, the more natural they become. And soon they stop feeling like confrontation and start feeling like truth. You realize that every time you say no to something misaligned, you're saying yes to your values. Your time becomes intentional. Your space becomes sacred. E6 becomes sacred. Your relationships become a reflection of your standards, not your silence. The people who truly see you won't ask you to compromise yourself to stay connected. They'll adjust. They'll learn your rhythm. They'll honor your boundaries because they recognize they're not walls, they're doors. Doors to mutual respect. Doors to honest communication. Doors to a deeper kind of connection. Because you're not keeping people out. You're guiding them in to the real you, the unfiltered you. The version of you who finally believes they are worthy of care, even when that care comes from within. You're no longer waiting for permission to protect your energy. You're doing it, unapologetically. And that's not just empowerment, that's liberation. So no, you don't need to be more available. You don't need to soften your truth. You don't need to explain your peace. You just need to keep showing up for yourself, clear, firm, grounded. Because the most powerful thing you can ever say isn't yes. It's this is where I stop and where you begin. That's not a wall, that's a boundary. And it's yours. And it's yours.
Chapter 5. Time is a non-renewable resource. Let's talk about your time. Not your calendar, not your to-do list, not your productivity levels, your time, your life, your one-way currency. You don't get it back. You can't buy more of it. And yet, how often do you spend it like it's limitless? You give it away in small moments. A meeting you didn't need to attend. A call that went on too long. A favor that drained your energy, but earned you approval. All of it adds up, and suddenly you're exhausted. but you can't quite point to why. It's death by 1,000 yeses. Because every time you say yes to something that doesn't matter to you, you're stealing from the things that do. Your time is not just about what you do, it's about who you become in the space you allow yourself to exist. That novel you never wrote, that course you wanted to take, that trip, that hobby, that long quiet afternoon just for yourself. They don't slip away all at once. They disappear behind obligations that were never yours to begin with. Here's the shift. Start treating your time like it belongs to your future self. Would she thank you for how you're spending this hour? Would he feel proud of how you protected your energy today? Time isn't just measured in minutes. It's measured in presence, in attention, in alignment. So start asking the harder questions. Does this commitment move me forward or hold me hostage? Is this request honoring my time or hijacking it? Is this a true yes or just a fear of saying no? Because the way you spend your time is the way you spend your life. And if you're not careful, you'll reach the end of a week, a year, a decade, and realize you were busy the whole time but never present. You don't owe anyone your time just because they ask for it. You don't have to apologize for protecting the minutes that matter. You don't have to say yes just to keep the peace. You are allowed to say, that doesn't work for me. You are allowed to say, I don't have space for that right now. You are allowed to guard your time like it's sacred, because it is. This chapter is not about managing your schedule. It's about reclaiming your life. You don't need more hours in the day. You need to stop giving your hours to things that starve you. It's not about hustle. It's not about waking up earlier or multitasking harder. It's about choosing what actually deserves your time and what doesn't. Because when you say, I don't have time, what you often mean is that's not a priority. And that's okay, until it's not. Until your priorities start slipping down the list. Until your dreams are the last thing you schedule. Until the version of you you're becoming is shaped entirely by other people's urgency. This is where it changes. This is where you get honest about what you're allowing to steal your minutes. How many hours have you lost in conversations that went nowhere? In tasks that kept you busy but moved nothing forward? In overthinking decisions that didn't matter in the long run? How many days have blurred together, not because you didn't work hard, but because none of it was yours? You deserve better. You deserve to wake up and feel aligned. To say, this matters. This fuels me. This is mine. But that only happens when you stop defaulting to yes. When you stop measuring your worth by your availability. When you stop feeling guilty for not being constantly accessible. You weren't born to be on call for the world 24/7. You were born to build something sacred with your time. Even if that something is just silence, stillness, breath. Because time well spent doesn't always look productive. Sometimes it looks like closing your laptop early, like turning down the event, like going for a walk instead of checking your inbox. That's not laziness. That's legacy. You're building a life with your time. Make sure it's a life you want to live. And that might mean saying no to everything that doesn't fit, until what's left is exactly right. There's a certain pride people take in being busy. We brag about packed calendars. We glorify exhaustion. We use busyness like a badge that says, look how important I am. But the truth is, being busy isn't the same as being intentional. And doing more doesn't always mean you're living more. Sometimes it just means you're avoiding what matters. It's easier to stay in motion than to be still. Easier to fill your day with obligations than to ask yourself if you even want the life you're rushing through. But here's the thing. If you don't protect your time, someone else will use it for you. Every yes you give without thought becomes an open door, and not everyone who walks through it comes with respect. Some come with demands. Some come with distractions. Some come with their own priorities, expecting you to carry them like they're yours. And every time you agree, just to avoid friction, you train the world to treat your time like it's dispensable. But it's not. Your time is the container for your purpose. And when you give it away without question, you dilute the very life you're meant to build. So you start making cuts, not from cruelty, but from clarity. You remove the meetings that could have been emails, the relationships that only reach for you when they want something, the obligations that look noble but feel heavy, and in their place you create margin. You give yourself space to breathe, to think, to decide, without rush, without noise, without pressure. Because this isn't about doing less for the sake of minimalism. It's about doing more of what aligns. You start asking better questions. Does this nourish me? Does this bring me closer to who I'm becoming? Does this deserve a piece of my one wild, precious life? If the answer is no, you let it go. Because now you understand, your time is not a favor. It's a finite resource. And treating it with reverence isn't selfish. It's sacred. Urgency is a drug. It tricks you into thinking everything is important, that every message demands a response, that every ask must be met with a yes, and quickly. But urgency isn't always truth. Sometimes it's someone else's poor planning. Sometimes it's pressure disguised as importance. Sometimes it's the echo of a world that confuses speed with value. And if you're not careful, urgency will run your life. It will have you sprinting through your days without ever asking, is this even mine to carry? Here's a radical idea. Not everything deserves your immediate attention. You don't owe instant replies. You don't have to say yes on the spot. You don't have to let other people's timelines dictate your pace. You get to pause. You get to evaluate. You get to protect your bandwidth, not just for emergencies but for your existence. This is how time boundaries start to take shape. You begin scheduling white space in your day. You start ending meetings on time, even if others aren't used to it. You block off time just for you, not filled with work, not filled with errands, just you. At first it feels selfish, indulgent even, but what you're actually doing is reclaiming your rhythm. You're saying, I will not live in reaction mode. I will not spend my life on call for chaos. I will not measure my worth by how quickly I respond to noise. You shift from urgency to intention. And intention is where everything changes. Your yes becomes powerful because it's rare, honest, chosen. Your no becomes liberating because it's not about rejection, but alignment. And your time, it becomes yours again. That's when the rush quiets. That's when the pressure loosens. That's when you stop being a responder and start being a creator. You're not just managing your schedule anymore. You're shaping your legacy, minute by minute, choice by choice, no by no. You don't just wake up one day with a meaningful life. You build it hour by hour, boundary by boundary, choice by choice. And time is the canvas you paint it on. Every minute matters, not because you need to be productive every second, but because you're finally aware, your time is your essence. It's where your relationships deepen. It's where your creativity lives. It's where your rest heals. It's where your clarity grows. You start seeing through the illusions. The myth that being busy means you're valuable. The lie that exhaustion is noble. The trap that says you can do it all if you just hustle harder. You stop chasing. You stop proving. You start living.
That shift doesn't happen all at once. At first you'll question yourself. You'll wonder if it's okay to decline. You'll feel awkward saying, "I don't have capacity for that right now." But every time you honor your time, it gets easier. You start saying no with calm. You start choosing slow over scattered. You start valuing quiet moments like they're gold because they are. Your time becomes intentional. And with intention comes freedom. Freedom from urgency. Freedom from overcommitment. Freedom from being defined by how much you give away. You stop waiting for permission to protect your time. You give it to yourself. And slowly you build a life that fits. A life with margin, with stillness, with space to breathe, think, feel, create. A life that feels like you, not just the version of you others kept pulling at. Because at the end of the day, when all the tasks are crossed off and the noise has settled, you're left with one question. Did I spend today in alignment with who I want to become? If the answer is yes, even just a whisper of yes, then you're doing it right. Because this isn't about perfect schedules or flawless routines. It's about remembering what matters and protecting it fiercely. Your time is not for everyone. It's not for everything. It's not infinite. So from here on out, use it like it's yours. Because it is. Because it is.
Chapter 6. The space that no creates. Saying no doesn't just close a door, it opens one. A quiet, sacred space begins to form the moment you draw a line. Not a space filled with more noise, not a space filled with new obligations, but a space that belongs to you for the first time in a long time. It doesn't happen dramatically. There's no grand unveiling. It begins with a pause. The cancelled meeting, the event you declined, the request you passed on with grace but certainty. At first, the space feels awkward, like you should fill it, like empty hours are wasted hours. But that's the lie of productivity culture, that if you're not doing, you're falling behind. Truth is, doing less is how you remember who you are. You start to feel it, the breath you haven't taken in weeks, the thought that surfaces now that your mind isn't crowded, the clarity that only quiet can bring. That's what no gives you. Margin, room to reflect, room to feel again, room to move on purpose instead of by momentum. And it's in that room that your real life begins to rise. You begin writing again, not because someone's waiting on a draft, but because you have something to say. You go for a walk, not to close your rings, but because the sky is beautiful and your body asked for movement. You rest, not as a reward, but as a right. This is what happens when you stop filling every moment with someone else's urgency. You begin to access your own, not the kind that runs frantic, but the kind that pulses quiet and strong beneath the surface. Purpose, presence, peace. They can't reach you when your schedule is overflowing, but they bloom in the space your no protects. And that space, that's not emptiness. That's your life finally having room to breathe. At first the silence can feel loud. You're used to being filled with noise, with plans, with conversations, with movement, with other people's wants, opinions, requests. When all of that fades, it's tempting to rush back, to scroll, to schedule, to say yes again just to feel useful. But if you wait, if you stay just a moment longer in that space your no created, something else starts to rise. You, the real you, the one who's been buried beneath all the people-pleasing and overcommitting, the one who hasn't had time to breathe, to feel, to listen. And what you find might surprise you. You're not lazy, you're not flaky, you're not too much or too sensitive. You're just someone who's finally tuned back in. You begin to hear the questions you've been too busy to ask. What do I actually want? What do I miss about myself? What would my life look like if I wasn't living for everyone else? And as those questions unfold, answers begin to come, not from outside, but from within. This is the beauty of the space no creates. It's not empty, it's alive. It holds your ideas, your clarity, your curiosity. It makes room for new dreams to stretch their legs, for old passions to whisper, "Hey, remember me." It gives your body a chance to rest, not just physically, but soul deep. You start noticing the world again. The way light pours through your kitchen window, the way music moves through your chest, the way a slow, quiet morning can feel like magic. That magic was always there. You were just too overbooked to feel it. Now with space you remember. Life doesn't have to be a constant negotiation. You don't have to trade your peace for your belonging. You don't have to earn your rest through burnout. You just have to protect the space that lets your truth grow. And you do that every time you say no. Not to push things away, but to invite yourself back home. Not everything in life needs to be chased. Some things need to be allowed in. But you can't receive what's meant for you when your hands are full of obligations you never wanted. That's what your no makes possible. It's not about resistance, it's about receptivity. The moment you stop saying yes to what drains you, the universe pays attention. New energy starts to find you. New opportunities, new people, new insight. But it's subtle, not loud, not aggressive. It doesn't demand like the rest of the world does. It whispers. It waits in the space you protect. You begin to notice the invitations that feel different, the ideas that stir something alive in you, the projects that feel like flow, not force. These things didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were always waiting. You were just too busy to hear them knocking. We think the answer is more movement, more productivity, more output. But often the answer is less noise, less pressure, less pretending. And in that lessness you find your fullness. You stop chasing validation because you no longer need to be seen doing everything. You stop rushing toward milestones because you're no longer proving anything to anyone. You stop filling your time for the sake of looking occupied. You start living. And this space, this room your no created, is not just where clarity shows up. It's where alignment takes root. You realize you don't need to push for every good thing. You just need to stop blocking it with distractions disguised as responsibilities. You become someone who receives, not out of entitlement, but because you've made space for what's true. This is the power of the pause, the strength of restraint, the brilliance of no. You stop reaching out for everything and watch the right things reach back. The space you create with your no isn't just for rest, it's for reinvention. You start noticing that things feel different. Your mornings are slower, but not aimless. Your decisions are quieter, but more grounded. Your energy is no longer scattered. It's sharp, focused, yours. And in that stillness something begins to form. Ideas, longings, the gentle pull towards something that feels like it's been waiting for you. This isn't a return to the old hustle, repackaged with softer language. This is emergence, because now you have space to ask yourself, what do I want to build? What am I curious about? What would I try if I didn't owe anyone an explanation? You might feel a little reckless, a little foolish, but that's what it means to step into possibility. You begin exploring again, not to impress, not to outperform, but to connect with yourself, with your joy, with your creative edge. And in this space, nothing feels forced. You're not rushing to produce. You're not performing for approval. You're following the thread of your own desire. This is what no unlocks. A different kind of energy. One that's creative, alive, sacred. It might start with simple things. A walk that turns into a story idea. A weekend with no plans that leads to a breakthrough.
A conversation that opens a door you didn't know you needed. You realize your best ideas don't come in chaos. They come in stillness, in moments you once thought were empty, but are actually rich with potential. Your life begins to take shape again, not as a reaction but as a creation. And all because you were brave enough to say no, to the noise, to the pressure, to everything that told you staying busy was the same thing as being alive. Now you know better. Now you choose differently, and everything begins to shift. Here's what no one tells you. When you finally create space in your life, you realize you've been living in a fog, always rushing, always reacting, always a step behind your own truth. But in that space, that quiet room you protected with every no, you begin to see clearly. You see what's yours to carry, and what never was. You see what you miss, and what you don't. You notice who checks in when you're no longer available. You notice which commitments you don't even think about anymore. You notice that you don't miss the chaos, not even a little. And slowly you begin to build a new relationship with yourself, one that's based on trust, not sacrifice, one that asks you to show up honestly, not endlessly. You realize that you don't have to fill every moment. You don't have to answer every call. You don't have to carry guilt just because you chose your own peace. This space you've created is not a luxury. It's not a treat you give yourself when everything else is done. It's a foundation. It's where you meet yourself again. It's where your clarity, your confidence, and your creativity are reborn. And what grows from here, that's up to you. Maybe it's a new idea. Maybe it's a deeper relationship. Maybe it's simply a better night's sleep. Whatever it is, it will be rooted in truth, not pressure, not performance, not the expectations of a world that never asked how you're doing, only what you're doing. You no longer exist to meet the demands of others. You exist to become who you were always meant to be. And that person, she needs space. He needs silence. They need sovereignty. So keep saying no, not because you're shutting people out, but because you're letting yourself in. This is your life. And now finally, it's starting to feel like it.
Chapter 7. Getting comfortable with discomfort. Here's the part no one enjoys talking about. Saying no doesn't always feel good. At least, not at first. Even when it's the right decision. Even when it's necessary. Even when it's long overdue. There's discomfort. That tight knot in your stomach. The quiet worry that you've upset someone. The lingering thought, maybe I should have just said yes. This is where most people turn back. They say no once, feel the emotional friction, and decide it's not worth it. But the truth is, discomfort isn't a sign you did something wrong. It's a sign you did something different. And different is where growth begins. Because for years you've been trained to associate comfort with safety, to seek ease, to avoid tension, to blend in. But healing, transformation, freedom, they rarely show up wrapped in comfort. They arrive disguised as awkward conversations, as silence that feels too quiet, as the sting of someone pulling away after you finally set a boundary. Discomfort is the fire that burns off your people-pleasing. It's the friction that smooths out your need for approval. It's the pressure that cracks open the version of you that was never quite whole. And inside that pressure, you meet yourself. Not the version who's always agreeable. Not the version who tiptoes around everyone else's emotions. Not the version who hides behind "I'm fine." The real you. The one who can sit in the silence and still feel steady. The one who can say no and not need to be understood. The one who can disappoint someone else without betraying yourself. That's power. That's self-leadership. That's emotional maturity. But it takes practice. Because every new boundary will come with a test. Every no will ask you, can you stand in this discomfort without running back to old habits? Most people can't, but you're not most people. You're learning to stay, to breathe through it, to remind yourself, I'm not unsafe, I'm just uncomfortable. And the more you stay, the more your nervous system learns you're allowed to choose yourself and survive it. Discomfort isn't the enemy, it's the doorway. Every time you choose alignment over approval, you will feel it. That pinch in your chest, that nervous flutter in your stomach, that second-guessing voice whispering, what if this backfires? But here's what you'll learn over time. That voice doesn't speak truth. It speaks habit. The habit of over-explaining. The habit of trading authenticity for peace. You've lived there for years. It's familiar. It's known. But it's not freedom. Freedom is walking through discomfort anyway. It's pausing when you want to rush into reassurance. It's staying quiet when you want to fill the silence with apologies. It's saying no without dressing it up in layers of soft excuses. This is where your old self starts to break. Not because she was wrong, not because he was weak, but because they were never meant to carry this long. They kept the peace. They held it all together. They made sure no one felt abandoned, even as they abandoned themselves. Now you choose differently. Now discomfort becomes a companion, not a warning. You begin to recognize its voice. You stop interpreting it as danger. You start welcoming it as evidence that you're evolving. Because every moment of discomfort means you're telling the truth, not just to others, but to yourself. And the more you speak it, the stronger you become. Strong enough to handle the silence. Strong enough to let someone else be upset. Strong enough to no longer rescue people from their own reactions. That's growth. Not clean, not perfect, not always graceful, but honest. You feel the heat, and you stay in the room. You feel the urge to explain, and you don't. You feel the fear, and you move forward anyway, because now you understand. Discomfort isn't your downfall, it's your becoming. Growth rarely looks like success in the beginning. It looks like distance, like awkward pauses, like the first quiet no after a lifetime of automatic yes. It feels like loneliness, not because you're wrong, but because you're real, because truth has a different vibration than people-pleasing, and that vibration, it shakes loose everything that was never rooted. This is what discomfort does. It purifies. It strips away the roles you've played to keep others comfortable. It burns off the masks you wore just to be liked. It dismantles the identity built on approval and applause. You find yourself standing in a room with fewer people, but you feel more yourself than ever. This is the paradox. You lose what was never meant for you and gain what always was, but only if you stay in it. Only if you stop reaching for the exit. Only if you stop muting your truth. The moment someone else flinches, discomfort will try to convince you to go back, to smooth it over, to shrink, to explain yourself into safety. Don't. Stay uncomfortable. Let your hands shake. Let your voice crack. Let people misunderstand you, not because you enjoy it, but because you're learning how to live without constant validation. You're learning how to live free. And freedom, real freedom, requires you to be okay with not being everyone's favorite. It asks you to be okay with tension, with being too much for some, with being different than you were before, because this new version of you, they don't bend like the old one did. They don't perform. They stand, steady, whole, unafraid of the waves their presence makes. This isn't recklessness, it's integrity. And discomfort, it's the signal that you're standing somewhere new,
somewhere right. Every time you say no, you stretch a muscle most people never develop, the ability to tolerate other people's disappointment, not maliciously, not coldly, but with clarity, with kind, with zero apology. That skill changes everything, because once you can sit in the discomfort of someone else not liking your boundary, without needing to change it, you become unstoppable. You're no longer held hostage by the need to be understood. You're no longer running from tension. You're no longer shrinking to fit places that don't honor your wholeness. That kind of power, it's quiet. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't seek revenge. It simply holds the line. And people notice. Some will push harder. They'll test your resolve, tap your guilt, lean on the old you who always folded. But that version of you is no longer in charge. Now you recognize the test, and you don't panic. You breathe. You stand. You repeat the boundary calmly if needed. And you remind yourself, their reaction is not your responsibility. Discomfort will flare up, yes. Your pulse will quicken. You'll wonder if you're being too harsh, too inflexible. But underneath all that noise, something steady is rising. Self-respect. The more you honor it, the more natural it feels. And soon that discomfort, it doesn't go away completely, but it becomes familiar. A companion, not a threat. A reminder that you're choosing alignment over ease. And alignment always wins. Because when your yes is honest and your no is rooted, the ground beneath your feet begins to feel solid again. You're no longer balancing other people's needs while ignoring your own. You're no longer editing your truth for the sake of acceptance. You're free. And freedom isn't always comfortable, but it's always worth it. You are not here to feel comfortable all the time. You're here to grow, to evolve, to remember who you are beneath all the roles you were taught to play. And growth, it happens in tension, in the stretch, in the brave, shaky moments where you choose truth over ease. Discomfort isn't punishment. It's a signal. It means you're stepping outside the script. It means you're no longer operating on autopilot. It means you're choosing consciously, not reactively. And every time you sit in that discomfort without running, you teach your nervous system a new language. Safety doesn't require approval. Peace doesn't require perfection. Love doesn't require self-abandonment. You begin to trust yourself, to regulate in real time, to pause when your heart pounds and say, this is new but it's not wrong. That kind of inner stability changes everything. You stop being afraid of conflict, not because you enjoy it, but because you've learned how to stay present in it. You stop avoiding hard conversations, not because they're easy, but because you've learned they're necessary. You stop fearing rejection, not because it won't hurt, but because it won't define you. This is emotional endurance, the quiet kind. The kind built in daily decisions to keep choosing your values even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then, because discomfort doesn't mean something's broken. It means something real is happening. And if you can keep choosing yourself even when it trembles, even when it aches, you'll come out the other side with something no one can take. Unshakable self-respect. So next time it gets hard, when the guilt creeps in, when the silence feels unbearable, when the world asks you to make it easy again, remember this: you're not doing it wrong. You're just doing it different. And different is where the real life begins. Real life begins.
Chapter 8. Let your no be your compass. There comes a moment when you stop using no as just a shield and start using it as a compass. At first it was about defense, about protecting your peace, about holding the line. But now your no is about something deeper. It's about direction. Every time you say no, you're not just closing a door, you're choosing a path. You're saying, that's not who I am. That's not the life I'm building. That's not how I want to feel when I wake up. And that choice, small as it may seem, is sacred. Because your life doesn't just happen. It's created. Decision by decision, boundary by boundary, no by no. You begin to realize that your no is not an interruption to your life. It is your life shaping itself in real time. You say no to urgency, so you can say yes to presence. You say no to obligation, so you can say yes to authenticity. You say no to pleasing, so you can say yes to purpose. And with each one, your clarity grows. You stop doubting yourself. You stop looking sideways to see what everyone else is doing. You stop needing everyone to agree with your choices. Because your no is no longer reactive. It's intentional. It's rooted in vision, in self-respect, in the grounded knowing of someone who doesn't need to be led by fear anymore. This is what freedom feels like. Not just the ability to say no, but the wisdom to know when to use it. You're not burning bridges, you're building one, straight back to yourself. And with every step, the path becomes clearer. The most powerful people you'll ever meet. They aren't the loudest, they're the clearest. They move with intention, they protect their time. They say no with ease, not because they're harsh, but because they're anchored. That's what your no gives you. Anchor, direction, ground beneath your feet. It becomes a filter. Not everything gets in. Not everyone gets access. Not every opportunity is a fit, even if it looks shiny from the outside. Because you've learned just because you can, doesn't mean you should. Not every invitation is aligned. Not every connection is meant to last. Not every yes leads where you want to go. Your no helps you discern. It cuts through noise. It silences guilt. It clears the fog of people's expectations. And the clearer you become, the less explaining you need to do. You stop performing. You stop chasing. You stop asking for directions from people who've never walked your path. You trust yourself. That trust builds with every boundary you hold, with every moment you say, this isn't right for me, even when it's uncomfortable, with every time you walk away, not in anger, but in alignment. Because now, you don't just know what you're moving away from, you know what you're moving toward. Simplicity, presence, peace. You're not here to be everything, you're here to be true. And that truth, it doesn't need to scream. It just needs to be honored. One no at a time. You can't say yes to what matters if your life is full of things that don't. That's the truth most people avoid. Because clearing the path means confronting what you've been tolerating. It means asking hard questions. Why did I agree to that in the first place? Who was I trying to impress? What fear was I trying to silence? But when you start using your no as a compass, those questions don't scare you anymore. They guide you. They help you untangle the patterns that kept you overcommitted. They help you see where you've outsourced your priorities. They help you finally fully reclaim your focus. Because clarity is freedom, you begin to notice how much of your time was spent reacting. How many of your yeses were rooted in guilt, not desire? How many of your goals were actually someone else's expectations? That noticing isn't shame, it's power. Because now, you know how to course correct. You can look at your week and ask, does this reflect who I want to become? You can look at your to-do list and ask, is this aligned or just noise? And when something feels off, you don't need to justify or explain. You just say no, gracefully, clearly, without hesitation. That no doesn't push you away from opportunity. It pulls you closer to what matters. More energy, more focus, more alignment. You begin to operate from a different frequency, not frantic, but firm, not reactive, but rooted. And the people who truly see you, they don't flinch, they don't guilt, they adjust. Because your no isn't rejection, it's direction. You're not lost, you're not scattered, you're not trying to please your way to purpose. You're choosing every moment, every interaction, every next step. And that's how your real life takes shape. Your no is not just a decision, it's a declaration. It says, I know who I am, I know what I value, and I refuse to build a life that betrays either. Most people drift. They don't mean to. They just keep saying yes to what's in front of them, hoping it leads somewhere meaningful. But hoping isn't the same as choosing. And if you're not intentional, you'll wake up surrounded by commitments that look like success, but feel like a cage. That's where your no becomes your map. It tells you what not to build, what not to carry, what not to tolerate, even when it's shiny, tempting, or approved by everyone else. Because alignment doesn't always look impressive on the outside. Sometimes it looks like simplicity, like a slower pace, like fewer projects, but more presence. You learn to stop chasing what looks good on paper and start pursuing what feels right in your gut. That's the quiet wisdom of your no. It turns down the volume on other people's opinions. It makes space for your intuition to speak. It carves out a lane that's wide enough for your real life, not your resume. You stop proving. You stop performing. You start building, brick by brick, no by no. And what you're building isn't just a schedule, it's a soul-aligned life. One that honors your capacity, one that reflects your truth, one that never requires you to abandon yourself to feel successful. This isn't about having the perfect answer. It's about trusting the signal, the unease. That's data. The dread. That's direction. The gut instinct that something's off. That's your compass whispering, this is not the way. So you listen. You step back. You say no. And in that space the real way begins to appear. By now your no doesn't feel like resistance. It feels like refinement. It's no longer about escape. It's about creation. You're not just moving away from what drains you. You're moving toward what defines you. And that shift, it's subtle, but it's everything. You stop apologizing for needing space. You stop hesitating when your body says, this isn't it. You stop explaining decisions that were never meant to be committee approved, because you know. You've been tuning your inner compass this whole time. Every no has sharpened it. Every uncomfortable moment has clarified it. And now you move differently. Not faster, but truer. Not louder, but more rooted. You start making room for yes, the real kind. The soul-deep yes. The yes, this matters to me kind. That yes has weight. It has joy. It has direction. And it only exists because you cleared the noise. This is how aligned living begins. Not with a breakthrough, not with applause, but with a quiet, consistent refusal to betray yourself for convenience. You're no longer asking what others expect from you. You're asking, what do I expect from myself? And you answer with action, with choices, with 1,000 small no's that create the space for one bold, beautiful life. No to urgency, no to guilt, no to living at the mercy of someone else's chaos. Yes to sovereignty. Yes to slowness. Yes to decisions that feel like peace in your chest. Your no was never about rejection. It was a return to your path, to your power, to your power, to your purpose. And now that you've found your compass, you're not lost anymore. You're home. You're home. Chapter 9. No makes room for real relationships. When you start saying no, people notice. Not just because you're doing something different, but because, for the first time, you're telling the truth. And truth changes everything. The relationships built on convenience, they get shaky, the ones that relied on your silence. They start to crack. The people who only loved the agreeable version of you, they pull away. Let them. Because every no you speak out loud sends a silent invitation. This is who I really am. Are you still interested? Real relationships respond to that kind of honesty, not with punishment, but with presence. They lean in. They adjust. They grow with you. But you won't know who those people are until you start honoring your own limits. That's the test. That's the filter. It's not about pushing people out. It's about making space for the ones who are willing to meet you where you actually live, not where you pretended to live just to make things easier. This is where relationships deepen. Not when everything is smooth, not when you always agree, but when you're finally honest. And the other person says, I hear you, I still care. That kind of connection, it's rare, but it's real, and it only exists when your yes is genuine, because your no is respected. Boundaries don't ruin relationships. They reveal them. They show you who's capable of handling truth. They show you who listens when you speak. They show you who loves you, not just the version of you they find convenient. This isn't about testing people, it's about trusting yourself. And the more you trust yourself, the more aligned the people around you become. Not because you curated a perfect circle, but because you became someone who no longer accepts less than real. At some point you stop asking who's leaving, and you start noticing who's staying. Not because you always agree, not because you always say yes, but because your truth no longer scares them. These are the relationships that survive your boundaries. The ones that don't crumble when you disappoint. The ones that don't collapse when you say, that doesn't work for me. Instead, they adjust. They flex. They evolve. Because real connection isn't built on compliance, it's built on respect. And respect sounds like, I don't like it, but I understand. I didn't expect that, but thank you for being honest. Thank you for telling me your truth, even if it's hard for me to hear. That kind of dialogue. It doesn't just protect the relationship, it deepens it. Because you're no longer navigating through performance. You're not pretending to be okay just to keep the peace. You're not sacrificing your needs in exchange for belonging. You're showing up fully. And when you do, something incredible happens. You become easier to love. Not because you're perfect. Not because you're endlessly available. But because you're consistent, clear, and honest. The people around you don't have to guess. They don't have to wonder where you stand. They don't have to decode your silence. You say what you mean. You ask for what you need. And when you say no, they know you mean it. That reliability creates safety, not just for you but for them. Because if they know you'll protect yourself, they'll trust you to care for the relationship too. And slowly your world changes. It fills with fewer people, but the right people. People who want truth more than comfort. People who can sit in the tension without making it about them. People who honor your boundaries because they have their own. That's how connection becomes real. Not through perfection, but through honest presence. You were never meant to be agreeable all the time. That version of you, the always available, always accommodating, never disruptive version, wasn't lovable. They were useful, and usefulness can feel like love, until the moment you stop performing. That's when the truth reveals itself. You say no, and the temperature changes. You say, I need space, and someone gets quiet. You stop explaining, and the silence becomes uncomfortable. But the discomfort isn't yours, it's theirs. The discomfort of losing access. the discomfort of facing someone who no longer bends by default, the discomfort of encountering boundaries in a place where there used to be permission. And that discomfort, it's a filter, because relationships that require your self-abandonment to function are not relationships. They're contracts built on silence. You kept your needs small to keep things peaceful. You kept your voice low so no one would flinch. You kept giving so you wouldn't be left. But now you're breaking the contract. You're rewriting it. You're saying, I still care, but I won't disappear to make you comfortable. That shift changes everything. The ones who only knew how to love the version of you who gave too much, they fall away. The ones who were waiting for you to finally tell the truth, they step forward. And in their presence you feel something rare. You don't have to perform. You don't have to overextend. You don't have to earn your place by exhausting yourself. You just show up, fully, imperfectly, honestly, and for the first time you're met, not managed. This is the foundation of a real relationship. Not constant ease, but mutual respect for each other's limits, truths, and boundaries. And that kind of respect, it doesn't just make things work, it makes things real. Most people think saying no pushes people away, but here's what it actually does. It invites the right ones to come closer. Not closer to a version of you that's always agreeable. Not closer to your convenience or your utility. Closer to your truth. And truth is where intimacy begins. Because real intimacy isn't built through constant harmony. It's built through moments of tension that are met with grace. Through conversations that aren't easy, but are honest. Through boundaries that don't punish, but protect. Your no teaches people how to love you accurately. It gives them a map to your nervous system, your needs, your limits. It shows them how to walk with you, not over you. It says, here's how I stay healthy in this relationship. Can you meet me there? And the ones who can, they don't just accept your boundaries, they appreciate them, because your boundaries create clarity. Clarity creates trust. And trust is the foundation of every real connection. Think about it. When someone tells you the truth, even when it's not what you want to hear, you might feel surprised. You might feel disappointed. But you also feel safe. Because now you know where they stand. You don't have to guess. You don't have to walk on eggshells. You don't have to decode their silences or overanalyze their yeses. That kind of transparency is rare, and it's a gift. And as you give that gift, you start attracting it in return. You'll notice the difference. People who can hold space for your no usually have a healthy relationship with their own. They don't need you to be perfect. They don't need you to overgive. They just need you to be real. And that reality, that's the ground where the best relationships are built. Your no doesn't break connection. It refines it. It reveals who's willing to know the full version of you, not just the version who says yes. That's the quiet miracle of boundaries. They don't end love. They strengthen it. Because love that cannot hold space for your truth was never love. It was expectation. And you are no longer here to be defined by what people expect of you. You're here to be experienced as you are. Not filtered, not muted, not convenient. Full, alive, aligned. That's what your no protects. It protects the part of you that used to go quiet just to keep the peace. The part that smiled through resentment. The part that thought love meant always being okay, even when you weren't. But now love looks different. Love looks like space. Love looks like hearing no and not flinching. Love looks like giving someone room to be whole, not just helpful. And the relationships that honor your no, they become rich, not in noise but in depth.
Not in performance, but in presence. Not in quantity, but in quality. Because there's no pretending anymore. No performing. No editing yourself for the sake of approval. Only truth. Only mutuality. Only connection that says, I love you and I also love your boundaries. This is the shift, where love no longer asks for sacrifice. It asks for honesty. And when you bring your no with integrity, the right people won't run. They'll stay. They'll listen. They'll meet you there. And together you'll build something rare. A relationship grounded in reality, not fantasy, not perfection, just presence. And that's the kind of love that lasts. Love that...
Chapter 9. No makes room for real relationships. When you start saying no, people notice. Not just because you're doing something different, but because, for the first time, you're telling the truth. And truth changes everything. The relationships built on convenience, they get shaky, the ones that relied on your silence. They start to crack. The people who only loved the agreeable version of you, they pull away. Let them. Because every no you speak out loud sends a silent invitation. This is who I really am. Are you still interested? Real relationships respond to that kind of honesty, not with punishment, but with presence. They lean in. They adjust. They grow with you. But you won't know who those people are until you start honoring your own limits. That's the test. That's the filter. It's not about pushing people out. It's about making space for the ones who are willing to meet you where you actually live, not where you pretended to live just to make things easier. This is where relationships deepen. Not when everything is smooth. Not when you always agree, but when you're finally honest. And the other person says, I hear you, I still care. That kind of connection. It's rare, but it's real. And it only exists when your yes is genuine, because your no is respected. Boundaries don't ruin relationships. They reveal them. They show you who's capable of handling truth. They show you who listens when you speak. They show you who loves you, not just the version of you they find convenient. This isn't about testing people. It's about trusting yourself. And the more you trust yourself, the more aligned the people around you become. Not because you curated a perfect circle, but because you became someone who no longer accepts less than real. At some point you stop asking who's leaving, and you start noticing who's staying. Not because you always agree, not because you always say yes, but because your truth no longer scares them. These are the relationships that survive your boundaries. The ones that don't crumble when you disappoint. The ones that don't collapse when you say, that doesn't work for me. Instead, they adjust. They flex. They evolve. Because real connection isn't built on compliance, it's built on respect. And respect sounds like, I don't like it, but I understand. I didn't expect that, but thank you for being honest. Thank you for telling me your truth, even if it's hard for me to hear. That kind of dialogue. It doesn't just protect the relationship, it deepens it. Because you're no longer navigating through performance. You're not pretending to be okay just to keep the peace. You're not sacrificing your needs in exchange for belonging. You're showing up fully. And when you do, something incredible happens. You become easier to love. Not because you're perfect. Not because you're endlessly available. But because you're consistent, clear, and honest. The people around you don't have to guess. They don't have to wonder where you stand. They don't have to decode your silence. You say what you mean. You ask for what you need. And when you say no, they know you mean it. That reliability creates safety, not just for you but for them. Because if they know you'll protect yourself, they'll trust you to care for the relationship too. And slowly your world changes. It fills with fewer people, but the right people. People who want truth more than comfort. People who can sit in the tension without making it about them. People who honor your boundaries because they have their own. That's how connection becomes real. Not through perfection, but through honest presence. You were never meant to be agreeable all the time. That version of you, the always available, always accommodating, never disruptive version, wasn't lovable. They were useful, and usefulness can feel like love, until the moment you stop performing. That's when the truth reveals itself. You say no, and the temperature changes. You say, I need space, and someone gets quiet. You stop explaining, and the silence becomes uncomfortable. But the discomfort isn't yours, it's theirs. The discomfort of losing access. The discomfort of facing someone who no longer bends by default. The discomfort of encountering boundaries in a place where there used to be permission. And that discomfort, it's a filter, because relationships that require your self-abandonment to function are not relationships. They're contracts built on silence. You kept your needs small to keep things peaceful. You kept your voice low so no one would flinch. You kept giving so you wouldn't be left. But now you're breaking the contract. You're rewriting it. You're saying, I still care, but I won't disappear to make you comfortable. That shift changes everything. The ones who only knew how to love the version of you who gave too much, they fall away. The ones who were waiting for you to finally tell the truth, they step forward. And in their presence you feel something rare. You don't have to perform. You don't have to overextend. You don't have to earn your place by exhausting yourself. You just show up, fully, imperfectly, honestly, and for the first time you're met, not managed. This is the foundation of a real relationship. Not constant ease, but mutual respect for each other's limits, truths, and boundaries. And that kind of respect, it doesn't just make things work, it makes things real. Most people think saying no pushes people away, but here's what it actually does. It invites the right ones to come closer. Not closer to a version of you that's always agreeable. Not closer to your convenience or your utility. Closer to your truth. And truth is where intimacy begins. Because real intimacy isn't built through constant harmony. It's built through moments of tension that are met with grace. Through conversations that aren't easy, but are honest. Through boundaries that don't punish, but protect. Your no teaches people how to love you accurately. It gives them a map to your nervous system, your needs, your limits. It shows them how to walk with you, not over you. It says, here's how I stay healthy in this relationship. Can you meet me there? And the ones who can, they don't just accept your boundaries, they appreciate them, because your boundaries create clarity. Clarity creates trust. And trust is the foundation of every real connection. Think about it. When someone tells you the truth, even when it's not what you want to hear, you might feel surprised. You might feel disappointed. But you also feel safe. Because now you know where they stand. You don't have to guess. You don't have to walk on eggshells. You don't have to decode their silences or overanalyze their yeses. That kind of transparency is rare, and it's a gift. And as you give that gift, you start attracting it in return. You'll notice the difference. People who can hold space for your no usually have a healthy relationship with their own. They don't need you to be perfect. They don't need you to overgive. They just need you to be real. And that reality, that's the ground where the best relationships are built. Your no doesn't break connection. It refines it. It reveals who's willing to know the full version of you, not just the version who says yes. That's the quiet miracle of boundaries.
They don't end love. They strengthen it. Because love that cannot hold space for your truth was never love. It was expectation. And you are no longer here to be defined by what people expect of you. You're here to be experienced as you are. Not filtered, not muted, not convenient. Full, alive, aligned. That's what your no protects. It protects the part of you that used to go quiet just to keep the peace. The part that smiled through resentment. The part that thought love meant always being okay, even when you weren't. But now love looks different. Love looks like space. Love looks like hearing no and not flinching. Love looks like giving someone room to be whole, not just helpful. And the relationships that honor your no, they become rich, not in noise but in depth. Not in performance but in presence, not in quantity but in quality, because there's no pretending anymore, no performing, no editing yourself for the sake of approval, only truth, only mutuality, only connection that says, I love you and I also love your boundaries. This is the shift, where love no longer asks for sacrifice, it asks for honesty. And when you bring your no with integrity, the right people won't run, they'll stay, they'll listen, they'll meet you there, and together you'll build something rare, a relationship grounded in reality, not fantasy, not perfection, just presence, and that's the kind of love that lasts, love that lasts.
Chapter 10. Your life on your terms. Look at what you've created. Not just the boundaries, not just the brave no's, but the space, the clarity, the life that's beginning to take shape beneath it all. This isn't just about protecting your time anymore, it's about choosing your time. It's about filling it with things that nourish instead of drain. Your decisions feel cleaner now. Your relationships feel deeper. You're not explaining as much, you're not proving as often, and most importantly, you're no longer apologizing for existing. Because now, you understand what this was all about. You weren't trying to become difficult. You were trying to become free. And freedom doesn't always look big. Sometimes it looks like a cancelled plan and a quiet night. Sometimes it looks like deleting the app. Sometimes it looks like saying no thanks without an essay attached. These small acts are not insignificant. They're the infrastructure of your new life. A life with margin, a life with rhythm, a life with integrity. Because saying no was never just about boundaries. It was about building something better, something aligned, something that lets you breathe. You are no longer a collection of obligations. You are a person with needs, with dreams, with preferences that matter. And every time you say no, you're saying yes to that person, to the one who no longer disappears behind politeness, to the one who no longer flinches at someone else's disappointment, to the one who is no longer afraid to be seen choosing differently. This is your life. And you are finally claiming it. The more you say no, the more you realize peace is not a fluke. It's not luck. It's not something that randomly shows up when the world decides to be kind. Peace is built, brick by brick, choice by choice, no by no. And you're the architect now. You no longer say yes out of fear. You no longer jump when someone asks. You no longer carry what was never yours. Instead, you pause. You breathe. You check in with yourself first. Because now you know, every yes has a cost, and you've stopped treating your time like it's free. This shift, while subtle, touches everything. You move slower, but more intentionally. You're less reactive, more grounded. You speak with fewer words, but every one lands with purpose. You start designing your day around your energy, not your calendar. You stop explaining your rest. You stop apologizing for needing less noise, less chaos, less pressure. Because this is what you've been chasing all along. Not control, not success, but clarity. Clarity about what matters. Clarity about what drains you. Clarity about what deserves your time, your heart, your presence. You don't need to be everywhere. You don't need to be everything. You just need to be you, fully, wherever you are. And when you live like that, you don't need more. You just need enough. Enough space, enough energy, enough trust in yourself to walk away from anything that feels wrong, even if you can't explain it. Because that's what living on your terms looks like. Not loud, not chaotic, just clear. You don't owe anyone your exhaustion, not to prove your loyalty, not to validate your worth, not to keep a role that's quietly killing your spirit. That's what your no has taught you. You are not more lovable when you are more available. You are not more valuable when you are more exhausted. You are not more deserving when you are more agreeable. You are worthy, period. Even when you rest. Even when you say no. Even when you do nothing but breathe. That realization doesn't just change your choices. It changes your identity. You stop performing. You stop chasing gold stars. You stop trying to impress people who wouldn't know what to do with your truth anyway. You shift from seeking to standing, from explaining to simply existing, from proving to living. And in that stillness, something begins to bloom. Confidence. Not the kind you post online, but the kind that comes from knowing you can trust yourself, that your no is not impulsive. It's not a rejection of others. It's a return to self. This new life you're living, it doesn't need to be validated. It doesn't need to look like anyone else's. It just needs to feel like home. And when you walk through your day now, head high, heart steady, space protected, you don't feel guilty for it anymore. You feel grounded. You feel light. You feel free. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You stopped living for access, and you started living for alignment. That's not selfish. That's sacred. And it's yours. You've probably noticed it by now. The more you honor your boundaries, the more your life begins to organize itself around peace. Not perfection, not productivity. Peace. People start to treat you differently, not because you demand it, but because you embody it. There's something unshakable about a person who knows their limits. Something calming about someone who doesn't flinch at saying, "That's not for me." Something magnetic about someone who's no longer available for chaos. You become a mirror. When you hold your boundaries with grace, others begin to consider their own. When you rest without guilt, you give others permission to pause. When you say no from a place of grounded clarity, people lean in, not to convince you otherwise, but to understand what clarity sounds like. This is leadership. Quiet, firm, invitational. You're no longer in the business of convincing or conforming. You're in the business of choosing. Choosing peace over performance, stillness over speed, substance over spectacle. You realize the life you used to chase doesn't even appeal to you anymore. The noise, the hustle, the need to be seen doing everything for everyone. You've traded it for something better, a slower rhythm, a deeper truth, a way of living that fits your nervous system, your values, your actual self. This is what people feel when they're around you now. Not your effort, not your hustle, your alignment. And the beauty of that, you no longer need to be loud to be felt. You've become a quiet revolution. One that starts every time you say no.
one that grows every time you protect your energy, one that leads not by force but by example. This journey started with a single word, a word that felt heavy at first, awkward, uncomfortable, even selfish. No, but now, it's become your anchor, your compass, your quiet revolution. Because every time you've said it, something opened. A boundary got stronger, a relationship got clearer, a piece of yourself returned home. That word, small as it is, has rewritten your life. Not because it was loud, not because it was easy, but because it was yours. Your no became a doorway, a filter, a line in the sand between who you were told to be and who you're finally allowing yourself to become. You're no longer performing. You're no longer overextending. You're no longer seeking permission to rest, to pause, to walk away. Now you protect your peace like it matters, because it does. Now you choose your relationships based on resonance, not obligation. Now you move with a kind of quiet confidence that only comes from someone who has stopped betraying themselves. And as you continue forward, you'll keep saying no to urgency, to pressure, to everything that pulls you out of alignment. But not because you're hard, because you're whole. Your no is no longer a wall. It's a gateway. It's not about isolation. It's about intimacy with yourself, with your truth, with the life that finally fits. So let this be your reminder. You are not too much for honoring your needs. You are not difficult for protecting your time. You are not unkind for choosing your well-being over someone else's expectations. You are clear. You are brave. You are free. This is your life. And now you're finally living it. On your terms.
Conclusion. This was never just about saying no. It was about remembering that you have the right to choose, to rest, to change, to protect the life you're building, even if no one else understands it. It was about reclaiming your energy, recentering your voice, rewriting the story that told you your worth was tied to your usefulness. Every no you speak is a declaration. I belong to myself now, so take this clarity with you, into your relationships, into your decisions, into every space where the old version of you would have said yes to be liked. You don't need to be liked. You need to be real, and that's exactly who you are becoming. Honor your time. Trust your instincts. Say no when it costs too much. And remember, saying no isn't the end of your connection to the world. It's the beginning of your connection to yourself. Live like that. If you found this content enriching and valuable, we would be deeply grateful if you could express your appreciation through liking and subscribing. Your support is incredibly meaningful and enables us to continue creating content that resonates with you. For those who think this is a great gift for yourself or for your loved ones, you can find the link in the description.